Welcome to the show. James Swanwick here. What is on your bucket list? What have you always wanted to do, accomplish, but you just haven't got around to it? Maybe there's procrastination. Probably alcohol's been getting in the way, slowing you down, making you lethargic. What are those things that you said, oh, I'll do that next year, next month, next decade, and then years and decades pass and it doesn't really happen? Well, today's guest is a friend of mine from Venice Beach in California, and he is the founder of an incredible organization called 100 Things, which is all about goal setting, connection, achieving bucket list items, and really going for it, helping people get clarity on what they want to go for, and then actually achieving that. And today we're going to be talking about what is on your bucket list. What do you really want to do, but you just haven't been doing it? And we're going to give you a little gentle push and a little gentle nudge today. Seb Terry from 100 Things. Welcome, sir. Great to have you here.
Hey, mate. How you doing? It's an Australian in Venice. An Australian. I think everyone was probably expecting a Californian.
Yeah, no, we're two funny talkers for our American audience, two Australians here. Hey,
Yeah.
Seb, tell us a little bit about you and 100 Things.
Well, mate, in a nutshell, hi, everyone who's listening. I have a list of 100 things that I'm trying to do to be happier in life, if not perhaps get closer to a sense of purpose. I've been doing it for 15 years. And the catalyst for me were a few things. One, I got a degree after finishing school, and I felt very lost at the end of that. And I felt underwhelmed, and I was curious as to why that was. I went backpacking overseas. Whilst I was overseas, I lost a close friend of mine back home in Sydney, where I was living, of course, back then. And that made me kind of reevaluate how I was living through almost the lens of how I saw my friend, who was living very on purpose. He was living a very values-driven life. And there were, I just found it quite inspiring, really. And it was a wake-up call for me. So I jotted down a list of 100 things that I thought would make me smile, at least, because as I saw it, I just wasn't happy. So I prioritized that, and I decided to drop everything in my life to do it. So, throw it into the mix there. I also had a business because I thought that's just what you needed to do, and didn't make any money and made me not depressed, I don't think, but certainly lackluster in life. And a combination of all those things saw me just take a one-way trip, which I'm still on, really. 15 years later, I've achieved many things from the list, very bizarre things, from delivering a baby, marrying a stranger in Las Vegas, walking across a country, doing stand-up comedy, helping a stranger, donating money to charity, blah, blah, blah. But the best thing is, of course, that it's grown into like a big community of people around the world who will now set their goals, strive for their goals. And we're fortunate enough to help people achieve their goals, very much like what you're doing, mate.
Thank you, Seb. Yeah. Delivering a baby. You also got married in Vegas to a stranger. Tell us about that.
Well, it wasn't the same stranger. It was, but yeah, I mean, look, that was one of the first things I did for my list. And I mean, all the things get me out of my comfort zone. I think people have different things. That's the beauty. It's a relative concept. What do you want to do before you die? Is usually the framework, the way we frame the question. It doesn't have to be that. If anything was possible, what would you do? What's something that you're not even sure quite why, but it's something that's been burning in the back of your head for a while. For me, it was about exploring, getting out of my comfort zone, seeing if I was capable of doing these things. Why wouldn't I try and do it? So yeah, I just flew to Las Vegas by myself, met a stripper called Crystal in a pool of mud, proposed to her. She said yes. I then booked a wedding drive-through chapel with an Elvis impersonator. About 20 people turned up, but she didn't. Crystal did not turn up. She stood me up at the altar. And so I had to desperately plead if anyone else would consider marrying me. And thankfully, someone in the crowd said yes. Her name was Shivali. We got married for one day, then I left the country. She knew this, by the way. It wasn't like she woke up in the morning and thought, where's my husband? But yeah, that's how that happened. And it was bizarre. And it's interesting. It's not necessarily the world's most inspiring story. It's funny. But for me, it just changed my perspective on living. I just thought, well, if I can do this, and I feel this good, conceptually, the idea of just doing things that we feel we would like to is good enough. I really felt a sense of purpose. I was really passionate about it, if you will. And so, whether it's doing something stupid like that or something that's far more meaningful, something that's, tied to finance, tied to business, tied to family, tied to impact, tied to physical health, whatever these goals are, we just need to be unearthing our own, whatever's whatever's relevant really and meaningful to us. And I think in that lies the secret to creating a good list. You don't have to marry a stranger, but you could. Depends.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you actually created a list in a time of your life. Was it in your 20s? Is that right? And then you systematically went through this list and tried to knock them all off. Has the list changed? Has it stayed the same? How far into it are you?
Yeah, I had this list of 100 things. I was 25. So at that point in my life, I'm 41 and 3/4 now. And when I was 25, as I said, it was all about, I'd lived a pretty sheltered life at that point, didn't have much experience. And so for me, all the items were these, breaking the shackles, so to speak, liberation, freedom, independence. So jumping out of planes naked, and all the things. Now, of course, the list slightly changed as I'm a different person. I crave more connection now. I like the idea of giving back where I can, and I'm really fortunate to be in a position where I can now, in certain ways. So yeah, the list has changed. Yeah, it started off, this big adrenaline fuel thing. I just left Australia, and it was systematic in the sense that once I did something, I would look at the list and go, what could I potentially do next? But things also just worked out, as you know, very beautifully. When you commit to something fully, the world conspires to help, I think, whether that comes by way of a person, a circumstance, a third party of some sort. And yeah, things really happened. And the journey itself blossomed in a way that I never thought it would either. It was only ever meant to be a personal thing. I never thought anyone would know about it. But I think what happened was a lot of people quickly saw themselves in me. They saw their story in mine and thought, well, if he can prioritize things that are important, why can't I? And then that really changed the trajectory of the journey. So it became less about just me, but more so about, well, maybe I could be of service to these people. And maybe I could even connect people to help each other out. I mean, more recently, we've found a kidney for someone who needs a kidney, through this community that's blossomed over the years. So yeah, it started off as one thing in a very superficial way, marrying a stranger in Vegas, but now lives have been saved and people are thriving. I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah, share a few more stories, if you will, anecdotally, of some folks who've maybe watched you speak on a stage. When I see you talk on stages, and by the way, Seb travels around the world and he talks to organizations, corporations. What do they hire you for, Seb? Are they trying to get their staff or employees to be more creative, or is it just to give back for them? Like, what's the purpose of corporations hiring you to go and speak and share your story of 100 things?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I never thought speaking was a job, by the way. I was about 2 years in and people just started asking me to speak. So at first, I think a lot of it was around, hey, would you come in and entertain our staff or our groups? And, the purpose of which I'm still a little unsure, but I would go in there and share some funny stories and talk about goal setting and breaking down large tasks into smaller palatable pieces and the idea of goal striving, etc. So there's that. And I have a very funny vehicle to kind of share those stories. But now, there's always something different. Of course, with COVID, there was this the great resignation, as we called it over here in the US. People felt unmotivated, disconnected, just very lackluster, felt lonely. Mental health became a big thing. And so I would get asked to speak to staff to almost solve for those things. How do we maintain what, I think a lot of people talk about this work-life balance. I'm not quite sure that's the term I would use, but how do we look at our lives holistically, making sure that even though when we're alone, how do we generate community virtually? How do we make sure that we feel this sense of progress and purpose in a period of time which was incredibly disruptive for us? How do we make the most out of adversity? And of course, I believe that adversity really gives us a sense of perspective, and then armed with the right perspective and the ability and the environment to take action, I think we can take ourselves out of any situation. So I would talk about that stuff. I'm a big believer that I call it the passion effect, but I love the idea, and I've seen that through my story and many others now, that if you're able to integrate passion into the things that you do in and out of the workplace, not only do you unlock unlimited amounts of motivation and clarity and resilience internally, but you unlock those qualities in the people around you, whether that's your family, friendship circles, or colleagues, peers, etc. Not only do you sort of deepen a connection and understanding of yourself, but you deepen that connection with the people who are directly around you. And I feel that if you really take it upon yourself to strive for your most meaningful goals, personal and professional, I think that, yes, you become the spark for your own sense of personal development and growth. But again, this ripple effect being a real thing, I've seen that you actually become the spark for a collective evolution, a transformation. And I think, you know, in a time where people have this hybrid working, of course, around the world, some people are never going to go back to work potentially. It's really important to understand the mechanics and frameworks to how do you inspire a workforce to all be passionate, to be performing at their highest, to cultivate thriving cultures, etc. So a very long-winded, convoluted way of saying I'm bought in for a few things, but essentially it's around performance, mental wellness, culture.
And what are some of the actions that people who listen to you end up taking? If we just rattle off a number of them, what have you seen people do?
Well, I mean, people have really changed their lives. Ultimately, not that everyone needs like a 180-degree shift. Some people, it's just 1 degree, and a very small percentage of people are already on track. But
Yes.
it's this idea that we can all give ourselves permission. You don't have to wait for a dark moment. You don't have to wait for COVID. You don't have to wait for a loss like I did in my life. You don't have to wait to be diagnosed with an illness. You can really right now make a choice, because we're radically accountable for what we do in our lives. We can all make a choice to change. Change is inevitable. It's all happening around us, you know, at every moment. And if we don't change, we get left behind. And so, you know, it's not just embracing change, but it's how do you instigate change internally as an individual, or of course in a workplace. So, you know, we've seen teams come together, teams being able to identify individual missions, goals, as well as collective ones. You know, I did a talk in Australia. Even though I'm based here, I go back to Australia occasionally and speak as well. And I spoke at a financial advisory, and I used to do a lot of that stuff in Australia. And interestingly, I got there and about a dozen people had seen me speak before, but probably 8 years ago, at this particular conference I spoke at. And a handful of them came up to me afterwards, and it was incredibly humbling, actually, and pretty overwhelming. And they each came up to me and shared how my talk had changed the trajectory of their lives, some personally and some professionally. One guy, for example, had his name was Trevor, and Trevor had broken his neck after I had spoken years and years ago. I can't remember how he said he did it, but he somehow broke his neck, and he was in a state of deep depression and not knowing what to do. He had read my book. And in my book, one of the things on my list was to say yes to everything for a week, kind of like Jim Carrey's movie, Yes Man. And he said that he decided to do that. And he said that 1 week was the most profound week he's ever had in his life. And it made him positive, optimistic. He saw growth and progress in small ways and some bigger ways. Now he started his own financial advisory firm. He's thriving in life. He's healthier. To wrap in what you're speaking about and what you do for so many, he's also alcohol free now.
Amazing.
There's personal transformation. And when you talk about individuals, I mean, you're talking about every aspect of life. So people have really, I think, grown, blossomed, discovered themselves professionally and personally. And you know, I think that's probably the tip of the iceberg. We could go quite deep with this.
Yeah. I wanted to share a couple things. I feel like I was pretty good at working through what may have been my 100 things before I ever met you, Seb, in the sense that I never had a list. But when I was living in Australia growing up, I knew very definitively that I wanted to go and live overseas. And in 1999, I did that. I moved over to the UK. And then when I was there, I just decided I really want to cover a cricket and rugby World Cup in 1999. So I ended up getting a job at Sky Sports, and I was a sports journalist, and I got to go to all the cricket World Cup games and all the rugby World Cup games. And that was amazing. Then after that, it was, I really want to go and live in America. And then I ended up going and living in America. And I'll never forget, one of my bucket list items was hosting a TV show. And my mother used to bring home this video camera back in 1990, and my brothers and I would pretend to be news anchors, and we'd kind of act out this little, fake robbery, and I'd be the news reporter on the scene. And I just knew inherently inside of me, I really wanted to host a TV show and be on TV. And in 2010, I got the opportunity, and I auditioned to be an anchor on ESPN, and I got the job, and I hosted that show for 2 years. And I remember being in the ESPN parking lot about 30 minutes after I had made my debut hosting the show. And it was about 11:30 at night. And I took a little selfie video. And I was just saying, I can't believe I've done this. Was on my bucket list to host a show. And I did it on the most iconic sports television show in the world, SportsCenter on ESPN in America. even though when I first dreamed of this, I was living in Australia and America wasn't even on my radar. And I remember just thinking, wow, what an incredible accomplishment. I'm so relieved. I'm so happy. I'm so proud. This is what euphoria absolutely feels like. And it was just such an incredible feeling. And I share that story because, if you're listening to this and there's something that you've always wanted to achieve and you haven't, maybe you've thought it's impossible. Let me just say it's not. And keep striving towards that, because the feeling that I experienced as a result of accomplishing that bucket list item was just, I haven't been able to replicate it since. It was so good.
Well, mate, I firstly, well done. I love that story. And of course, we have a mutual friend in Ty who I think worked with you on that show. And
Yes,
that's
you
how
did.
we met. But that feeling you explain it's a really interesting one, because I think I'd like to think that everyone's experienced that in some way, shape, or form when they achieve something that's meaningful to them. And, of course, I could rattle off lots of things that have made me feel that way. Not necessarily world-changing things, but just things that are meaningful. And I used to think, well, what is that feeling? You say, it was a feeling of euphoria, of real satisfaction, this real feeling alive, buzzing. Like, I remember, I often, when I achieve one of my things, I feel a sense of buzzing, physical buzzing in my body. I don't want to be anywhere else on the planet. I am exactly where I need to be. What is that? And so through the lens of science, we actually discover that when we strive for a meaningful goal, there are these two pleasure chemicals that are released to the body. I'm sure most people here have heard of them, but dopamine, serotonin. So dopamine is released in the anticipation of doing something meaningful to us. It's actually quite addictive. It makes us feel like we can run through doors and jump over mountains. And serotonin, in complement, it reduces depression. It regulates anxiety. It makes us feel more confident. It makes us feel good. And what's so beautiful about these pleasure chemicals is they're not just released when we achieve a goal, but they are released from the very moment that we identify and write down a goal, and all the way through that goal striving process. So I would almost say, and I want to ask you, did you feel that feeling, even in a small part, before you achieved that, that your debut show on ESPN, where you felt so incredible? But I wonder, did you feel good from the moment you identified that goal and through that process, at least to some degree?
I absolutely did. And along the way, I failed at my first audition, but I was so excited to request a second audition and get a second audition. So long before I actually was given the job and I was in, I guess, the progress or in the striving for it, I had this anticipation and this excitement, which was, if I'm understanding you correctly, was also releasing dopamine and serotonin. And then when I had the setback where I just completely fluffed my first audition and they told me I wasn't going to get the job, I kept striving and I requested a second audition and they gave it to me. And then I was reinvigorated. I was excited. And then I did the second audition and then they gave me the job and I had the excitement. And then candidly, on the day that I made my debut, before I went live on the show, I've never felt more scared and nervous in my entire life. I don't know what drug or hormone was rushing through my body then. It was probably cortisol, but I was so nervous. I was going to the ESPN bathroom like every 30 minutes, 45 minutes and urinating. My body was such in a state of fear and anxiety.
Yeah.
But then when I finally did the show, presented it afterwards, it was just, amazing. Wow. And every book I've read, and certainly you just confirmed this, every book I've read, on happiness and satisfaction seems to suggest that it is the pursuit of the goal and the struggle for it, or the striving for it, that gives us, in fact, the most pleasure over time versus the actual achievement of it. Because yes, in that 30 minutes, an hour after I completed it, I was so euphoric. I mean, it was amazing. And then I realized afterwards, I kind of went back to a baseline over the next days. I had this feeling of satisfaction and I loved that job. But I realized that the joy and the pleasure came as much, if not more, from the striving for the goal than just the actual achievement of it.
There are so many things to talk about here. I mean, the fact that, you said you sort of after you got there, you sort of fell off a little bit and were like, well, what's next? That's the beauty of having a list, because you can have a look at a list and go, well, that's the next thing. And I want to do that now. So interestingly, out of Harvard, they did research, and they said that they found that if you have a purpose-driven goal, if you're able to identify a goal of substance that is personally relevant, and of course, to you as an individual, a goal for a family, a goal for a business, there are so many things that happen. I mean, I would title it, you become unstoppable. And I think everyone's probably felt that, and you've exemplified that. The first audition didn't go well, and you were like, where's my second audition, everyone? I'm going to get the next one. Where does that come from? Because a lot of people think that these goals just have, I throw myself at a goal and I get it. But often that's not the case. There's always this resistance, and, you know, people would label it as quote unquote failure. Failure, by the way, is just giving up. That's failure. But where does that resilience come from? Where do you get this ability to stand back up and try again and not worry and think creatively? Well, that all comes, this research shares, from being able to identify a purpose-driven goal. It makes us more motivated, more confident. Our decision-making process becomes more refined. What's this beautiful term I learned the other day? There is a minimization of the perception of obstacles, meaning that if you had come up to an obstacle in the pursuit of a goal that didn't mean anything to you, you'd probably let it stop you. But because you really cared about hosting a show, to use your example, you got this obstacle and you thought, right, how do I get around it? And it was as easy as saying, right, I'm going to go and search for this second audition. So again, you know, you look at these people who do amazing things, and the question they get is, well, how did you keep going? And the answer is simple, because they truly cared about what they were doing. And if anyone listening, and I'm sure everyone's got this feeling in some degree, whether the goal was a tiny thing or a huge thing, a long-term, a short-term, a simple goal, a complex goal, as long as you cared about it, you knew that nothing was going to stop you. And I'd argue that we also give ourselves way too little respect. We unfortunately, I think as a default to humans, we underestimate how capable we are. And until we try, we don't realize. But when we try, we realize, oh, I could do actually a little bit more than I thought I previously could. So yeah, I mean, on the start line of any goal, by the way, I'm just going to keep on blabbing until you tell me to stop. But on the start line to achieving any goal, it might seem monumental. How does little, James Swanwick with a microphone, microphone and a camera that his mum gives him back in 1990, go, right, this is how I'm going to get onto ESPN. You don't. You just have to take that journey. And yes, there are parts where you have to be proactive and plan and work really hard. There are other elements of being spontaneous and reacting to the opportunities that come our way. But, the thing that allows all the above to work is knowing in the first place what you want. And then you can attack each goal differently.
I wanted to share a story with you that was born out of very much your 100 Things and you, Seb, which is we have this program where we help high achievers to stop drinking alcohol. We have a 90-day and a 365-day process. The 90-day process is called Project 90. The year-long process is called Beyond 90. And we had a gentleman from the UK. His name is Christian, late 60s. And for a few years before he joined and enrolled in our Project 90 program to get support stopping drinking, he was taking care of his dying wife who had a terminal illness. And he came to us just after she had died, and he was drinking a lot. He was drinking a bottle and a half of wine, if I recall correctly. He'd put on weight. He was irritable. He was sad. He was feeling depressed. He was just stuck in many ways in his life. And one of the things that we do for our clients, one of the things that we help them, apart from just getting clear from alcohol, is to really identify what they really want to create in their life. And during his 90 days with us, he identified that his former wife had said to him, when I'm gone, I really want you to do what lights you up. And he had identified that was sailing across an ocean. Now, he had some modest sailing experience, but never across an ocean. And so during his time with us, he committed to somehow, didn't know how, didn't know which ocean, didn't know when, to sailing across an ocean. And then almost fortuitously, divine intervention, whatever you want to call it, someone turned up on his life. He was having a catch up with them. And he asked him, how are things? And he said, oh, well, my wife died and I've always had this dream of kind of sailing across the ocean. And this person he was catching up with said, funny you should say that. I'm sailing across the ocean and we've just had our last person pull out and withdrawn. So we're actually looking for another person. Would you like to take the spot? And with little to no sailing experience, certainly not across an ocean, he said, yes, I'm in. And then some months later, he ended up sailing from the west coast of Africa to the Caribbean in a race, in a competition that took 17 days. And he sailed across the sea, or across the ocean, I should say, and accomplished his bucket list. And if you're listening to me now, you can actually listen to the interview that I did with Christian. If you go back, scroll back a couple of months, maybe to December or January or February, I'm not sure where it is, and just look for Widower 67 Sails Across the Ocean. You'll find that interview with Christian. And that came about, Seb, in part because of me knowing you and me being inspired by what you have shared and me implementing that bucket list item process into our stop drinking community. So I wanted to say thank you to you. And I'm sure, I don't think Christian actually knows you or knows of you, but he was in part inspired by you to cross that bucket list off his item and sail across the ocean. So thank you.
Oh, mate, I love it. And again, just talking about that passion effect, the ripple effect, it's true. It's true. I thank you for sharing. I'm so glad that it's something that you sort of add in to your program. And Christian, no doubt, was inspired so many people from doing that as well. But by the way, if Christian's listening, it's on my list. I want to sail across an ocean. I don't know how to sail, so I'd love to talk to him about it. But yeah, it's funny. I just believe, I mean, you talk about, was it divine intervention? Was it coincidence? Was it dumb luck? How did that circumstance pop up where someone said to him, hey, we need one more sailor? And how was it that he, there's more to it than just that. I mean, I said it before, the world conspires to help us out. There really is opportunity, abundance to everyone, at every single opportunity, at every moment in life, I should probably say. But the key is knowing what we want to do. If you understand what you want to do, if you really put that at the forefront of your head, you start to subconsciously notice things. If we were to, I mean, this is said a lot, but if you started looking for a new car and you wanted to get a Ford Mustang, you would start to see Ford Mustangs everywhere. Is it now that there are more Ford Mustangs on the road that particular day? No, it's just that you've kind of prepped your mind to notice these things. And again, it lends itself, or the conclusion you could probably make quite easily is it's so important to list your goals down, because by doing so, you start to tease the world to give you those opportunities. Yeah.
Is it important? I think what you might be referring to is what's known as the reticular activating system, the RAS, where you think about something all the time, and then suddenly you start seeing that thing. And what actually is happening is there's a bundle of nerves in your brain that are now lasering in to see that thing, or to see evidence of those things in your everyday life. It's one of the processes we do inside of Project 90, our Stop Drinking program, is to have our clients write down 20 things they're grateful for every single morning. 20 things, not 3, which is cute and nice, not 5, but 20. And the point of doing the 20 is to activate that reticular activating system, because when you write down 20 things that you're grateful for, you're searching for 20 things to be grateful for the remainder of that day. You will be shocked at how many things you just start to realize you are grateful for. You just start to see life through a completely different lens. So it sounds like that's what you're referring to, the RAS.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think this is the same thing exactly, but I'll add on. Isn't it interesting that if you start to, you bring into your life what you focus on, right? And so if you have a negative story or narrative, that you reinforce that through your action. Your beliefs lead to your actions subconsciously. Your actions, of course, generate the results. The results, if you imagine a triangle, go back and reinforce your beliefs. So I talk about this in my workshop. So if someone's, let's just say a little bit negative, they don't believe the world's kind to them and they're not good enough and people are horrible and all that stuff. That's their belief. They go out, they leave their house in the morning, they meet people, they keep their head down, they don't say hello, they don't start conversations because everyone's horrible, blah blah blah. They fast forward through the day, everything's pretty negative. They go home and the result is, well, the world didn't really shine for them because they didn't shine for the world, and it reinforces that initial belief they had that morning. They wake up the next day and it's slightly heavier, and you keep going like that day after day after day, week, month, year, and the world is kind of horrible to that person. However, the flip of that, of course, is someone believes the world's great. People are nice. They go outside, they smile, they have a conversation, they ask a question, they learn something, an opportunity, works out for them. So I'm sort of, again, just going ahead of myself here, but how do you change that? How do you change that negative mindset into a positive one? Well, I don't think it's as easy as just going, well, the world's great. It's hard to do that if you've seen no evidence of it, and you can't change a result directly because it's action of those 3 points on that triangle: belief, action, result. So that leaves action. That is what we have to concentrate on. And if you go outside, even if you think that the world's horrible and you just smile at one person, you might get a smile back. And your result for that particular day, at least, will be, there was one person who smiled at me. And that might be enough to just start reversing that negative process you have. So again, that I wrote it down, the reticular activating system. I don't know if it's the same thing, but all I know is the mind is very strong, and what you think generally occurs in real life. And it's very important to know.
Yeah, another anecdotal story I'll just share with you. About 3.5 years ago, I was in London, I'm sorry, I wasn't in London, but I made the plan to go to London because one of the things on my bucket list was to go to a Tottenham Arsenal game at Arsenal. So I'm talking about English soccer here for those who aren't familiar with the terms I'm calling. But I'm a massive Tottenham Hotspur English soccer team fan, and Arsenal are their dreaded rivals, the team that we hate the most and they hate us the most. Think about Yankees, Red Sox, or the New York Giants, or the New England Patriots. Think of the great rivalries in the world. Tottenham and Arsenal are one of the great rivalries in the world. And so I had a bucket list item, which was to go to the Emirates Stadium, which is Arsenal's home ground, sit with the Tottenham fans and be abused by the Arsenal fans. And, of course, back in the 80s and 70s and 80s and 90s, it was actually quite dangerous at times to go to an English soccer game because people would get into fights and there'd be flares and there'd be violence and there's lots of hooligans. These days, it's much more relaxed, although people still like to yell obscenities and vulgarities at each other. And that, for me, was where the fun sort of came in. And so I ended up getting 2 tickets. I invited my very first roommate from when I lived in London, who was also a Tottenham fan, to come with me. I bought very expensive tickets because, these are prized possessions. I won't reveal how much, but let's just say that it was more than hundreds of pounds. And I went and sat in the Tottenham end at the Emirates Stadium to watch Tottenham play Arsenal. And the seats were literally right next to the end of the Tottenham section and the beginning of the Arsenal section. And my former roommate and friend, we got abused the entire game from these Arsenal fans. And I absolutely loved every last second of it. I was just laughing. I was in hysterics. They were screaming at us with these vulgar hand movements. And people were actually very angry. Like, it was crazy to see these people getting so angry. And I was just laughing in hysterics. Tottenham went up 2-0. We ended up drawing 2-2, which wasn't as great, but the whole experience was just so wonderful. And I remember leaving the ground with my friend, and he went off on the tube and went home, and I was there by myself walking around, and I took a little video selfie, and I said, I just accomplished one of my bucket list items, which was to be with the Tottenham fans at an Arsenal game, get abused by Arsenal fans, and I just accomplished it. And I absolutely had the best time. It was so much fun. And again, that was in part inspired by you and your 100 things, Seb. I recall that very vividly, knowing you and understanding the importance of, a bucket list and achieving it. So thank you again for that experience.
Oh, mate, well, that's fantastic to hear. I'm unsurprised, knowing you, that was on your list. It's great to hear. And that feeling, you say that was the absolute best feeling that you felt. That's available to everyone. Everyone. The key, though, is just knowing what is that meaningful to you. And it doesn't have to be curing cancer. It doesn't have to be, climbing Everest, jumping out of a plane. It doesn't have to be any of those things. It could be meditating 3 days a week. It could be being kinder to yourself. It could be seeing a therapist more. It could be, of course, stopping drinking. It could be absolutely anything. It could be anything. It just has to be meaningful. Goals don't have to be world-changing. They just have to be personally relevant. I read that James Clear book, Atomic Habits, a while ago, and I can't quite remember the quote, but it's something to the effect of, and I'm sure you might know it, something to the effect of change doesn't require... no, what is it? Something like change doesn't require radical action. It just, can you help me here? Do you remember what it is? I'm the king of
I don't know
not
the
remembering
exact
quotes.
quote, but they're just meaningful incremental steps
Yeah,
towards.
yeah. Exactly that. So you don't have to radically change your life to find meaning
Yeah.
or to find purpose. You just have to consider what is important to you and just implement it bit by bit by bit. And that's easy enough for me to follow.
And just because, most people are listening to this on the Alcohol Free Lifestyle podcast, most people are listening because they want to have a better relationship with alcohol. So something meaningful to them may not be stopping drinking. That will provide the mechanism, but the something meaningful as to why they're stopping drinking could be things like save the marriage, be more present with your children, have enough energy to play with your children, say I love you, say no more, ask or request a divorce, get a job, get a promotion, start that business, really drive your business. And so what we do at Alcohol Free Lifestyle, certainly in our programs, is not just helping you to stop drinking. Again, that's just the mechanism. But what we're really trying to help you do is live the life that you want to create. And it doesn't have to be buying Tottenham tickets and going to an Arsenal game. It doesn't need to be sailing across the ocean like Christian. It doesn't need to be what Seb did all those years back in his 20s, which was throw in his career and head off on a one-way ticket overseas. It doesn't have to be as dramatic as those things. It could just be as simple as, I want to play with my grandson and have energy doing so and love doing it.
That quote is, meaningful change does not require radical change. But yeah, no, I agree. I'd also sort of suggest for anyone out there, of course, now knowing that you help people achieve one meaningful goal at least during your program, it's probably worth noting that the foundation to being able to create a meaningful list, whether it's one goal, which by the way, it can just be one goal, whether it's 10, 100, 1,000, doesn't matter, as long as there's at least one on there. The key to it is understanding what I would call the spokes to your wheel of life. If you imagine a bicycle wheel, spokes give that wheel structure, allow it to maintain its form and travel and be a wheel. If you imagine that your life is that wheel, what are your spokes? What are the important general aspects of your life, which without you simply wouldn't be yourself? So I've been doing, these workshops for 2 or 3 years now with corporates, basically. And we found that there are many, many spokes, but the 12 most common, and I'll forget some of them, but are things like family, romantic love, key relationships. They're sort of quite similar. Impact, professional development, personal development, travel, creativity, physical health, if I didn't say that already. What else have I got here? Yeah, travel, adventure, creativity, financial security. It goes on. Now, you don't need all 12. On average, we find that people have between 6 and 8 spokes. But if you're able to identify those 6 to 8 spokes of yours, and then you go through a process of rating their strength from 0 to 10, 0 is weak, 10 is strong, you can understand how much structural integrity your wheel has. How are you doing? I did this activity, I do it quarterly, and I do it with friends. And my wheel strength, by the way, is 5.8 at the moment, which is not great. However, the beauty of it is you get a really clear current understanding of where you could actually improve. So my travel and adventure right now is essentially a 10. My romantic love is a 2. I've actually got it next to me. What else was awful? Creativity was the other bad one. I've been on the road. I've been speaking a lot on lots of stages in Europe, in the US, and Australia, and New Zealand. It's been a lot of fun, by the way, which is why the travel and adventure is high. But yeah, creativity. I'm trying to learn a piano song at the moment. It's hard to find a piano when you're traveling. So anyway, for anyone listening who's thinking, well, how do I actually get to identify a meaningful goal? Well, understand the core tenets of your life. Understand what your spokes are first, and then go from there. Build a list of goals which will strengthen each and every spoke. And yeah, just thought I'd like to share that because it might be important.
Yeah, amazing. Just one anecdote for home and wrap up here is I recently enrolled in a Sotheby's art course to learn about art from mid 1800s up until modern day. And I did it because I knew nothing about art. Nothing. I was actually quite embarrassed knowing that I didn't know what Impressionism was or who Monet really was or the difference between Picasso and Michelangelo and Da Vinci and all. I kind of heard these names and I kind of saw some art, but I just didn't know anything about it. And I realized, well, not realized, but I kind of started to sense that I was feeling a bit one-dimensional. Like I know everything about Tottenham Hotspur and the players and how many games we need to win to qualify for the Champions League. I know everything about alcohol because I live and breathe helping people to stop drinking alcohol. I'm well-traveled, but I really didn't know anything about art. And I can't say that I was passionate about art because I knew nothing about it. It was just I had this curiosity. And so almost on a whim, I just Googled Sotheby's Christie's art programs. And in one afternoon, I signed up for an 8-week Sotheby's art program, which I'm 4 weeks into now as we're recording this. I signed up for an in-person Christie's art program in London, which I'm traveling to in 2.5 weeks from now. And I enrolled in a Christie's New York walking tour of art, which takes 5 days in June. So I just decided, you know what, I'm not going to do this half-heartedly. I'm going to throw myself in, immerse myself in art. And in 4 weeks, wow, I've learned so much. And now I almost feel like a pseudo intellectual, you know, where I can have the conversation about Michelangelo and Da Vinci and Monet and Manet. And I could talk about surrealism and neo-romanticism, all those kind of fancy words that I knew nothing about. And always thought the people who were like saying these things were just like trying to show off or like, you know, big note themselves. Now I can rattle off and speak with confidence on those things. And I can tell you, I don't know what. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's just such a beautiful example, and mate, it's why I you know, it's why in part I think why we're friends. It's a sense that it's inspiring to hear. It's really inspiring to hear, and you know, and I'm learning more and more that the people that you're around with in life are, you know, maybe one of the more important decisions that we make, plural, is who we decide to hang around with, and you know, thinking of you as a friend personally, and now what you're doing for your community, and I'm sure people like Christian and all the others in the community are doing, it's nothing but inspiring. And I just love the idea that you're generating that community of people who are changing their lives, and in doing so are changing other people's lives. It's fantastic.
Thank you, Seb. I appreciate the kind words, and right back at you. I appreciate you. Where can our listener find out more about 100 Things, most importantly?
Well, my website is my full name, sebastianterry.com. Instagram's probably the easiest one outside of that, which is Seb 100 Things. And that's it. Yeah, come find me. I live in Venice otherwise. If you see me driving around in a 1979 VW bus, or a combi as we call in Australia, flag me down. I'll give you a ride somewhere.
I love it. Yeah. Follow Seb on his Instagram. Definitely. Seb 100 Things. There's lots of inspiring stories there. And when it comes up on my feed, I get inspired to do something else. So, and when you do follow him, just send him a DM and say, hey, I heard you on the Alcohol Free Lifestyle podcast. And hopefully it inspires you to take some action on whatever is on your bucket list. And if there's nothing on your bucket list and you'd like there to be, then maybe just take the time, follow, or accept Seb's invitation to create one. Really look at areas of your life, your health, your wealth, your love, your happiness, identify what you'd like to improve, and then, create your own list and start taking action. Seb Terry from 100 Things. Thank you so much, mate. I really appreciate your guidance and support, and for sharing exactly how people can achieve the items on their bucket list. Thank you, sir.
Cheers, Swanee. What a pleasure.